All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another episode. Really excited to be back with Elliott today, and we're going to talk today about stopping saving for retirement for a brief period of time, which I think Elliott and I are both sitting here like, well, hopefully we answer this question with yes, it's okay, because when we started our businesses, we both had to do that. So it's not just for if you're starting a business, though. There's plenty of other major life events that you might just need more cash in the interim, whether it's a positive thing or maybe a negative thing. And yeah, it's kind of a taboo topic to tell someone you're stopping or you're not saving, because every article out there is going to say you must save this much for this many years and earn this percent to ever retire. So Elliot, how are you going before how you doing before we jump into the topic today?
I'm doing well. I'm gonna watch some tennis today at the university, and then I'm going to Costco this weekend, which I love Costco, so I'm looking forward to that. What about you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. No tennis for me today, but I think we're gonna grab, it's Friday, so we're gonna grab a fish fry with some friends and just chill this weekend before, house chores and wedding season is upon us. So I think it'll be a pretty chill weekend. But yeah, awesome to hear, and let's jump on in. So stopping saving for retirement. You've done it. I guess you want to start with just some of your logic that went into that decision and how it felt. That's an
Yeah,
interesting
I
way to
mean,
look at it.
let's start with the feelings first.
Okay.
That it is highly uncomfortable, like you talked about, when you're told to always invest a certain percentage or a certain amount, whatever savings you're doing, it is tough to turn that off. So I just want to acknowledge that it's a tough thing to do emotionally. And I think that's the biggest thing. I know for myself, it was one of those things where I knew I'd have to stop it if I wanted to start a business, but it didn't make it any easier. And I've been doing this. I've told other people to stop contributions in the past. I mean, we've been through this. If anybody's well positioned to do it, I think it's you or I, to be able to tell people that. And it's still a challenging thing for us sitting in this position to do that.
Yeah, maybe especially so since we're usually telling people to save for retirement, but then, behind the scenes, it's like, ha, joke's on you. We don't save for retirement. But we'd love to, right? And I want to point out something that you said there too, Elliot. It's hard to stop, right? And I think if you put any words before or after that statement, it's true if you haven't started saving
Yeah.
for retirement, right? It's going to be hard to stop, maybe spending in order to save. So we just want to meet people where they're at and say, no matter which side of the coin you're on, it can be hard to stop doing what you're doing and start doing something else. Change is hard. Fun fact.
It is
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
But I think it comes back to, and we talk about this a lot, but the personal and emotional side of things. Of what are you trying to accomplish? So when you talk about, hey, there's maybe somewhat of like an imposter syndrome, maybe not the right term, but I'm not saving myself, but I'm telling someone else to save. Well, we have different life things going on,
Yeah.
right? I've told people, oh, you want to take a sabbatical? Great. Stop saving into your retirement plan for a year or 6 months or 2 years or whatever time frame it is, so you can take a year off to be with your kids or to go travel the world or do whatever you want to do to fit in a little more life and a little less finance. That's the important part. And for me personally, I wanted to start this business and I recognized that this would be a step back for at least a year, maybe 3 years. That was sort of my time frame that I gave myself, is this has to work by 3 years or appear it's working. Otherwise, I need to go do something else to where I can save. That was fitting my life in. And thankfully, I'm back to a spot where I can be saving. But there was a period of time where I wasn't.
Yeah, I love that too, like setting a deadline for it. And that's not to say, right, it has to be a hard deadline. Like, and I want to give, speak into my feelings and I guess experience with this too, where, you know, I was moving across the country and starting a business. So like there were a lot of moving expenses and business expenses and less income. And then by the time income was starting to come back, we were close to getting engaged and we're like, we should probably buy a house before things get too crazy. We should definitely have an episode about, I know you're a big fan of prenups and maybe we'll have a little battle there. So we should definitely talk about that in a separate episode. But it was okay. Well, business and now house and now Like we're starting to save for starting a family, so it's like this is kind of all just dragged on. But I want to go back to what Elliott said in saying that, that's we're just trying to build our ideal life. And, it is something where I feel it every single day. Like I need to start saving for retirement. But the truth is, like, Allison's still saving for retirement. Allison has a pension. Like those are super awesome things that we have going in our favor. Um, and yeah, it is scary, but there are things where, saving for retirement and not getting a house, if that's what you really want to do, is not going to make you feel any more secure about your financial life. And so acknowledging what is going to do that is a super important step. So
Yeah.
you said sabbatical, I said house and kids. Like what are some other things that you've seen clients, feel torn about, like, do I do this or do I save for retirement?
Yeah, I always think about any big life change that you've been through, a family member's been through, a friend. So common ones that come up is we're having kids, right? You just talked about that, family planning. We want to transition to a less stressful job. I'm from Seattle, met a lot of tech workers, big tech boom. People wanted to scale back either to start their own companies or to just work in a lower, more fulfilling paying job. That wasn't doing it for them anymore. I work with caregivers. So scaling back to care for a family member, potentially going part time or quitting entirely. And there's risks embedded in that. Those are the immediate ones that come to mind. What have you experienced?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same thing. But another big one that I think is especially challenging for maybe like one generation ahead of us and lower, would be student loans, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where, you'd love to have a retirement account the size of your student loans, but the truth is you're staring down this big payment and complicated, numbers and terminology and the title of those student loans, and you're like, how am I ever going to pay this off? Yet you want me to save for retirement too. And then another big one I've seen is maybe like an adverse medical
Mm,
event. I think it's a relatively unknown fact, but it probably won't surprise many people listening that medical debt is usually the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States. And that can be really daunting, especially if you are self employed and don't have the greatest health insurance, or, I don't know, maybe it's just some emergency situation where you weren't expecting it. And you're just saddled now with this big number that nobody wants to pay. But also, I think like credit card debt or past debt challenges can be another really big one where you may want to think about stopping saving for retirement. And when we think about that with our clients, Elliot, what are I know we can't give legit financial advice here, or quote, when is the best time or what you need to do to make it worth like saving for retirement. But what are some of the factors you look at when you're looking at, expenses, maybe some debts, and not saving for retirement? How do you help clients come to that decision?
yeah, you and I were talking briefly before this, and I think it comes down a little bit to interest rates, right? So if someone has a credit card where the interest rate's 20%, probably safe to say you're going to forego making any sort of retirement contributions. Can the market return more than 20% in a year? Potentially. Does it do that consistently? No. So I always like to think about it as if I pay off that debt, I'm guaranteeing myself a 20% interest rate by paying it off. That feels good. I think it starts to get more challenging once you get into near that 6% range where maybe you make a contribution, particularly if you have a match, maybe you pay off the debt. And that's where it can come down to sort of personal decisions of what you feel more comfortable doing, not necessarily the financial aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it is an extra interesting time right now, no pun intended, with higher mortgage rates, right? Like I think for a long time, when rates were 3-4% and maybe even lower than that if you were in that golden window, it could be really challenging to say like, oh, I want to pay off my mortgage instead. But now I think we're starting to see somewhat of the opposite side of that coin take place, where if you do have a very high interest rate mortgage, like boosting a retirement is still a great thing to do, but I think there's more of an argument to be made in some cases. Would you agree with that?
I
Especially with
think,
student loans. Like, yeah.
yeah, I think so. Again, I think it depends on their financial plan and what they're trying to accomplish, and all those variables that go into that. But certainly, it's an easier decision at 6% than it is at 3.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like, I've certainly had a couple of clients who come in with some pretty heavy credit card debt, and thankfully they've made the commitment to work on that.
Yeah.
Most of them, anyways, and that's something where if you're really really struggling with that, and like you said, falling behind by 20% interest rates, that's something where you can explore like consolidating that or
Yeah.
maybe making use of a 0% APR credit
Yep.
card to like really hammer that stuff down. And that's going to feel really good. And then you can get back to those retirement contributions. But again, consult your financial professional before you do any of those things. But it is an interesting thing, right? Because I see far more articles of, you must save this much and compounding interest, the eighth wonder of the world. Like, but not too many people talking about like the cost of debt for
Yeah.
those pieces out there.
It's definitely a huge cost. And I think, if I had to separate the two, we've talked about sort of having a time frame for it or working towards a specific goal a certain period of time. I think there's sort of two lines to this, or falling on either side of the line. There's, it's scary to do, like we talked about. And if I do it, I'm still going to be okay. There's people who fall into that camp. And then it's scary. I'm not quite going to be okay, or I don't have the plan figured out. And I think it's really important to figure out the plan and the parameters of how to make it work so you can go do it and you feel good doing it. Because
Mhm.
it's not a good feeling to just jump in, not do it, and then not have a plan and just sort of bury your head in the sand. And then 10 years later, you're like, oh, I probably should have done something different.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a really good point where just the accountability to, I mean, bringing people from like your community or from your friend group or your family into some of those decisions just to like actually help you get those things done so you can go back or they can check in and make sure like you said you were going to stop saving for retirement, like did you get back to it, yeah, before you show up like you said 10-15 years later and you feel really far behind, and it is going to take a lot of consistent years of aggressively saving for retirement to catch back up. So
Yeah. I want
it,
to call
it
out what
is,
you just said, Matt, just on the public accountability piece. That's huge. So I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah.
Telling
And
people.
yeah, and for those of you like listening, again, we're not making any recommendations, but leave a comment or just like send us an email. Elliot and I are both here. Like, if you can't afford a financial advisor or like you just don't want to work with one, like that's okay. That's a personal choice. But if we can in any way, shape, or form like help be that accountability, like let us know. Yeah.
Please. I love public accountability. I love holding people accountable to something that they say they will do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I think when we think about some of those other things too, Elliot, like, I guess how do we know we're making the right decision without necessarily knowing what's going to happen? Like, because so much can change, right? Like you said, the market could go up 20% 5 years in a row, like, and we might feel some regret or remorse if we made the decision to pay off some lower interest debt. Like, how do we know if we're making the right decision?
I I don't think people like this answer, and I generally don't like it. But I think in a lot of cases we don't know if we're making the right decision at that time. And I think there's a way to frame this, and there's a good article. I don't remember it exactly, but it's framing the process versus the outcome. And
Mm,
like you talked about with the outcome, in 5 years, did we do the right thing? Well, part of that feeling is probably going to be, was it successful? Right? Did I stop saving and did I get to do all the things that I wanted to do? Well, great. I made the right decision. Whereas let's fast forward 5 years, I stopped saving. Things didn't turn out how I anticipated. I'm not back to saving. Nothing's working. You'd probably say, oh, well, I didn't quite do the right thing.
yeah.
In both scenarios, you may have followed the same process but had a different outcome. And I think that's really important to differentiate, that you can only make the decision today based on the facts and the feelings that you have today.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think too, I think, like you said, right? Like on the facts and the feelings you have today. And I think a really important hill to get over, like regardless of what decision it is you're trying to make, maybe it's to start saving for retirement. I don't know. But, I think if I were making that decision, like, would starting the business, we're going to go back in time, would starting the business be worth me potentially having to retire 3 years later? Like,
Yeah.
is that a trade-off I'm willing to accept? And if you're okay making those trade-offs, like, I think you're going to feel fine, like whether it works out or not, like, but you still have to do everything in your power to make sure that it goes the way you want it to go, right?
Yeah. So Matt, you've put me on the spot a lot, so I'm going to put you on the spot for this
Yeah.
one. Let's go back to you starting the business. What were the factors that you were thinking about to decide, okay, I'm going to stop saving? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me it was just like I was able to save for retirement at my last job, but there was something about that last job where it just wasn't checking the boxes, and this really flows through to like how I approach life with my clients. But I'm not a big believer in like putting all my eggs in the retirement basket, which is going to sound really crazy from a retirement planner, right? But if you're miserable, like, and I'm not saying I was completely miserable in that last job, but if you're not getting to do what you want to do each and every day, like, is it really worth giving up 40 years of your life doing that just so that one day you can say, I don't have to do that anymore? Or would taking a bet on yourself and getting to do things the way that you enjoy doing them be worth like having to at worst go get a job somewhere? And to me that was an easy yes. It wasn't an easy yes when I started that journey. I needed to talk to a lot of people like Elliott, to help get me to the top of that hill and say that with confidence. But I think that's pretty true, right? And I'm sure you've seen it too with your clients where they work and work and work and work and work with the hopes of like traveling the world one day, and something happens or they don't even make it to retirement, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, dang, like, all for what, right? But I think I want to hedge that statement and say having a YOLO approach, right, which is what you were basically telling people to avoid, isn't going to make you any more comfortable or confident, and it's probably going to take away some of that joy of the thing you're doing because you're always going to be worried about that other shoe dropping. So proceed with caution, but once you know what caution looks like, I think you still have to proceed, right? Otherwise you're just
Definitely.
sitting in place. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good thing. And I always think about it from a life planning perspective of, you are on that deathbed, proverbial deathbed. And what did you not get to do? Right? Who did you not get to become? What did you miss out on? Most people are not going to say, oh, I didn't save 1 percentage point more to my 401k. Like that's what I missed out on. But, oh, I did get to go travel for 3 months and I stopped my 401k for, half a year to be able to go do that.
Yeah.
That's for
And
some people, that's a worthwhile trade off and a great thing.
yeah, and I think you hit a really interesting thing. If you're not sure, like, what else you want to do, like, just maximize those contributions early on. Like, give your future self, right, some of those options to say, oh, well, maybe if I save strong now, like, I don't have to be worried about maxing it out every year from 30 to the day I retire. But if you start early and start often, you're going to give a lot more options to yourself, 5, 10 years down the road to make that decision.
Definitely. It's slow at first. And I think that's the other thing to keep in mind with savings and compounding is you don't really feel it for the first 10 years. So it can feel like
Yeah.
you're doing nothing. But as Matt just talked about, you are setting yourself up for a lot of flexibility later on, whatever age you start.
Yeah. And I love what you say there. Like, and I think we should do, maybe our next episode should be compounding interest. Just a spoiler, there's not going to be any investment. We're not Warren Buffett here giving you the hottest stock picks or anything, but
I didn't
I
know Warren
think
Buffett did that.
Well, maybe indirectly, right? But
Yeah,
I'm sure he's not a registered investment advisor for most of the people taking his advice. But um, it's one of those things where I think it really is important just to understand like how starting off strong is important. It's not everything, but it is important if you want to have options, in the shorter term future for sure.
definitely.
Yeah. So I guess any final tips for like people who might either be thinking about stopping or maybe need to start back up, like any final closing thoughts?
Maybe don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. At least for myself, that's very easy for me to jump down the rabbit hole in. And that's just something I recognize about myself. You know you best. Sometimes just taking a small step forward in one direction, maybe that's saving $5 more to your 401k. That'd be a good step. Or maybe it's stopping saving $5 in your 401k and seeing what happens. And then how does that feel and what happens? You don't have to make a drastic step. We've talked about drastic steps today, but you can also make this in small increments to see what it's like and then go from there.
Yeah, that $5, Elliot, it's suspiciously close to a Starbucks coffee. You're not trying to bash Susie Orman, are you? No?
No, I thought about
Okay. Okay.
$5 just because that was a small denominator that I thought maybe you could change it by. But
Yeah. And for those of you who don't get the joke, like there are some financial pundits out there who claim that Starbucks is killing your retirement. And if you come across that, send them to Elliot and I. We'll have a good chuckle when we're off camera. So, anyways, it was awesome chatting again, Elliot, and we'll see you next time.
likewise, Matt, enjoy.